Larry Elder, who ran as a Republican in the California recall race to replace Governor Gavin Newsom just over halfway into his first term, was not successful in his attempt back in September. And I've been holding off on giving my wrap up final thoughts on this whole thing. I've been covering this since, I guess, earlier this year when it really became official that the recall was happening. But I sat on my thoughts after the election was called and all the votes had come in, to kind of let it sink in and see what Newsom would be doing in the following weeks. And this seemed like the perfect timing for this wrap up because there was elections this week and the recall very well could have been this week. But also, I know that the midterms, which is this race is going to come up again next year, is almost exactly 1 year away next week. So that was all the timing. I was kind of thinking in my head, how do I cover this? So I want to start with some highlights of the positives, even though I personally was disappointed that the effort failed. I've been trying to be kind of pretty neutral, or at least trying to share multiple angles of this. And so in the back of my head, I knew it was a possibility that it would fail, but of course I didn't want it to. But that is what it is at this point. And I've already kind of moved on and move forward and kind of learning from this, but I want to touch on some of the positives that I found in this, other than the people who maybe had a lot riding on this being disappointed and thinking it's kind of doom and gloom. I don't believe in that. So the first fact is that the fact that it even got this far in California in today's political climate, I think is something to be proud of and take note of. And even the idea there were talks, it was possible Newsom could have been ousted and this could have been a successful campaign, to me is a good sign. And it looks like the elections across the country that we saw this past week are more confirmation that the disdain for the ruling class or the establishment fueling the recall in California may actually be more landscape changing elsewhere, where there isn't as strong of a one party rule. So in those swing states or in states where it's not as strong of a majority one way or the other, or there are more independent voters, meaning not registered with Republican or Democrat, that is where it could really make the difference. And one example of that was in New Jersey, where no one was really focused on that, at least from the news I saw. Most people were looking at Virginia because of all of what I've talked about or in the previous segment of a lot of the viral videos in the school board meetings. And so that was a surprise in New Jersey that it was even close, even though the Democratic governor, Murphy, I think his name is, is the first Democrat in that state to be elected to 2 consecutive terms. They weren't expecting it. Or they weren't expecting it to be a hard fought race. So maybe the recall in California was an early sign of what is to come. And as this year continued to unfold, we saw that kind of lead up to these last couple elections this past week. And maybe we'll see how the economic recovery goes and other policies coming to fruition and see if that grows the support for a change in direction for America that maybe a lot of people are starting to not be supportive of how things are going currently. Now, another positive is that only 1.2 million people signed the petition for the recall, but nearly 5 million California voters voted yes to recall Gavin Newsom, indicating this had more support than what Newsom and Democrats wanted you to believe and were willing to say. Now, they tried framing this race from the beginning, even before it was official and it was just signature collecting stage, as some far-right, radical, Trump, QAnon organized thing, and clearly it wasn't. Even if the top people who started the movement were those people, maybe it took 5 million people supported it. So clearly they touched on something that millions of people in California were thinking and feeling enough to go out and vote and support the effort. Also good was the fact that Democrats have a 2-to-1 advantage in voter registration in California, meaning 66% to 33%. But the results see the no to the recall only getting 62% and the yes getting 38%, meaning there are some who were unhappy enough to not go along with party lines, or that could mean the difference was made up of the independent voters not registered with Democrat or Republican in California. Also indicating this was not a partisan effort as it was framed by the Newsom campaign, and most commercials were saying, stop the Republican recall, framing it as this kind of takeover of California, if you will. Now, Larry Elder received 48% of 48.4% to be exact of the votes for the replacement candidate question, which was the second question on the ballot. And while it is reported also that almost 5.5 million voters left the replacement candidate question blank. Now, there are a few ways you can look at this because the Democrats supporting Newsom opted to push for people to leave who are not supportive of the recall, meaning voting no, to leave question 2 blank for a replacement so as not to give people any idea that anyone else in the party should replace Newsom, almost as if to ignore that any other Democrats were running in the race against Newsom and to try to squash any internal party fighting, meaning that there's other options in the party. They wanted their guy in. And so obviously that wasn't true because there were plenty of Democrats to choose from out of the 40 plus candidates on the ballot. But the most supported Democrat that I saw in the results was Kevin Paffrath, who is a personal finance YouTuber and real estate investor. So the problem with this method was that if this recall had passed and more than 50% of the voters had said yes on the recall, it would have been much harder to justify the legitimacy of the entire recall process, which is what they've been trying to do, of a replacement candidate not getting 50% of the vote. So I think they should have, they took the risk here, but they should have, if they want to be very sure, put someone up there, nominate someone or endorse someone in the party that has the same policies and same whatever, just a different look, name, and feel of Gavin Newsom, because a lot of people might have been voting against his personality. And at least that would have cut into Larry Elder's percentage of vote, even if he still won. And for context, the last recall in California in 2003, where Arnold Schwarzenegger won, he got about 48% of the vote. So him and Larry Elder basically got the same percentage of votes as far as replacement candidate, but this recall effort failed. But they can't use the fact that maybe the top candidate only got 20-something% or 30-something% rather than almost 50%, which would have been hard to debunk. So it looks like their strategy did pay off this time, but it could have been really bad had the effort actually passed and they didn't put up a replacement candidate, and then you do have a Larry Elder, a Republican, and then kind of self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. So they must have been very confident. I don't know that the recall wouldn't pass, but I don't know. But another positive also is when you look at the map of the recall, which I'll show here. And if you're listening and not watching, then you might want to go to the YouTube channel or Rumble and see the visuals, but I'm going to try to explain it well enough so you understand. But when you look at the recall map, where they have the shades of each county being this color, in this case, yellow meant yes to the recall and green meant no to the recall for each county, it looks like in the map that you see an overwhelming amount of no's from a color percentage of the map. But when you look closer, and it was actually not as good before all the votes came in. It was actually even less shaded in because the early votes really saw that the Democrat side or the no was winning more. But I'm going to explain a little bit here of how that was kind of misleading. But when you look closer at a few counties, in particular Orange County, San Bernardino, San Luis Obispo, and San Joaquin counties, they were all within 5 points of flipping to a yes, which from an optics picture would change things. And I want to just point out a few things here. So hopefully you can see my cursor. So if you look at the map here, you see this yellow right here is all the no, or all the yes, sorry, and the green is the no's. But if you look at this big block here of San Bernardino County, this was only, I think, 0.4% away from being a yes. So this could have turned yellow very easily. You see Orange County here, which is a very conservative area, was about, I think, 4 points different. And so you see Southern California plus San Luis Obispo County, which is here on the coast, right under that kind of straight across line That was only, I think, 6 point different, maybe even less. And so you see one, two, three counties in Southern California, these three very sizable counties from a population perspective and from a just a square footage or square mile perspective on the map would have made the map look a lot different. And then if we go to Northern California, San Joaquin, I think is right here. That was only, I think, 6%. So that would have changed the Central Valley as well. And I think this little sliver up here above Sacramento, which is in Nevada County, I believe, that was a pretty close one too. Every other one was pretty far off, like 10, 15%. But you just see how optically it could change very easily. And this is, and it only got more yellow throughout, or as more results came in. So also I wanted to touch on in that same vein, the Virginia race that happened this week. If you were looking at the map too, where they had red for Republican winning counties and then blue for Democrat, you see, if you look at the map in the same way we just did with the California one, it looks like, if you're just looking at clearly how much of the map is red versus how much is blue, it would be hard to argue that the red was not the dominant force across the entire state with a few pockets of blue. The problem is that race was still considered close because the blue were the heavily populated areas. So I think it's interesting to see how your eyes don't necessarily match up to what the data says because there are so many variations of population and makeups of all these different counties and interesting little things. And of course, congressionally, the districts don't line up exactly with counties a lot of times. So there's all these weird things that go on, and it's interesting how it can play with your perception of what's going on. And as we know, that's very powerful. Even if something isn't true, if you believe it to be true, or if a lot of people perceive it to be true, that can be even more effective than having a truthful thing happening. So just wanted to point that out. I always think that's interesting because I love the data and analytics part of this. It looks like the hill was too big to climb to overcome the advantage of the party rule in California. And who knows if the election had taken place this past week on the same day as these other races, if it would have looked any different. But maybe that was the reason it was scheduled at the earliest possible date, because there was a word of a downward trend in popularity for the Democratic Party agenda and spearheaded by the president, Joe Biden. So I will say I was worried that if Newsom survived, he was going to enact all these extreme policies and mandates that he kind of been waiting on to wait to see if he survives the recall, but hasn't really happened yet. Besides, maybe you could put in that category the vaccine mandates for school children, which I've seen already a few families I know of that have already moved out of the state entirely because they didn't want to vaccinate their kids. So I'm thinking the worst of the migration out of California is yet to come. But overall, I'm actually surprised he hasn't done more since surviving this, which I'm okay with. I think that's a good thing. But I am holding my breath a little bit, considering I think he may be holding off until 1 year from now when his term is up, and maybe want to wait for a second term confirmation before enacting anything else. Or he won't run again and opt to run for president in 2024, which that election cycle will start right after his term ends in January of 2023. So who knows, but I do expect Larry Elder to be in the running for some form of office next year, because his election night speech in Orange County indicated he isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and he referred to himself as a former radio show host. So I think Larry Elder could either run for governor again or run for federal office of either a congressional district, probably in LA because that's where he's originally from, or a statewide office as a senator, a U.S. senator. So I think this is just the beginning of the shift back to kind of normalcy and moderacy, and kind of the first warning shots that were fired in the unhappiness of people across America with the way things are going. Because if a California recall election can happen only 9 months into what is supposed to be the most popular presidency of all time, with a candidate that was supposed to be a kind of future of the party, and we've seen the same thing with Governor Cuomo in New York, who was touted as kind of the future of the party as well, and all these other elections that didn't really go the way the Democrats were planning. This is all kind of indication and all these signs across the country that people aren't happy. And so I think you have to take that into account.